Thursday night football, we have the Chicago Bears taking on the Carolina Panthers. I'm breaking down everything you need to know to build some winning lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings for the Showdown contest today. So if you can do me a favor, like, follow, subscribe. I really do appreciate it. It helps keep all of our content around here free. And then also, if you want to sign up for our NFL package, there's a link below to sign up. And listen, I think this is a very interesting showdown slate. Now, these aren't the two most talented teams in the league, but I have noticed in some of the lineups I'm building this morning that if you really like being contrarian on showdown, this is the slate for you. Like, this is a slate where I would not at all be surprised. I'm favoriting my top 150 lineups here for DraftKings and the Sims. I would not be surprised at all if this is a slate where we get a solo winner, which we don't see a whole lot of in the big showdown contest. But one thing that's really stood out to me that I was getting to about building lineups and the uniqueness of them, the amount of salary that's being left on the table in these lineups. So I just favorited my top 150 lineups. We'll go through my top overall projected lineup, but take note of how much money is being left on the table of my lineups that are projecting the best. This one is leaving my number one lineup leaves $5,500 in salary on the table. Second best lineup, $2,900. Third best lineup, $1,900. Do not be afraid to leave salary on the table because these are not the most prolific fantasy scoring teams that we have in the league. And there isn't that much that separates some of the guys who are priced at like $9,000 from some of the guys who are priced at like $5,000. And the majority of the field is going to be spending all, or if not all, close to all their salary. So that's a really simple way to diversify your lineups today. Now, looking at my number one overall projected lineup here, mentioned that it is leaving $5,500 in salary on the table. In the lineups that I built when they played against each other, this one did have a 515% simulated ROI. The lineup is Adam Thielen in the captain spot with the Bears defense, Bryce Young, Chuba Hubbard, the Panthers defense, and Terrence Marshall. So double defense, and kind of interested to see when I go and look at the actual exposures, how much of the defense I'm getting to on both DraftKings and FanDuel, because these offenses, not great. These quarterbacks, not great. I know Bryce Young was the number one overall pick in the draft, but to this point, he has been fairly terrible this year. He's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, and it seems very clear that CJ Stroud, at least as of now, should have been the number one overall pick in the draft. So let's go ahead and look at some of the exposures. And just as I'm shitting on him, Bryce Young showing up in 2/3 of my lineups here. So getting to a whole bunch of Bryce Young as well as Tyson Bagent. So Bagent going to be starting at QB again for the Bears today. It looked like there was a chance that Justin Fields is going to be able to get back on the field, but ruled out, still dealing with that thumb injury. So Bagent starting at QB, getting to both the quarterbacks, a pretty good margin. Defenses. Got the Panthers in 36% of lineups, Bears in 26.7. So M coming in overweight to the field on both defenses. That looks like the best spot to save salary on this slate. Now, with that said, what does salary matter? We was just talking about how I have lineups that are leaving $4,000 in salary on the table. But still, if we just look at the projected fantasy points here, we've got Adam Thielen projected the highest, followed by Bagent, followed by Bryce Young, Chuba Hubbard. So, look at some of these skill position players, right? Hubbard's projected for 11 fantasy points, but then the Panthers defense projected for 8.46. This is not a slate where there's a massive difference between some of the skill position players and the projections for the defenses. It's getting back to the exposures here, getting to the quarterbacks, also getting to Adam Thielen as a pay-up option. Then some of the pass catchers on outside of Adam Thielen, getting to Jonathan Mingo, who's only projected for 27% ownership, getting to him in 46.7% of lineup. So well overweight to the field on Mingo. Adam Thielen, also the most rostered captain in my lineups, followed by Bagent, then Mingo, then Bryce Young as far as captain ownership goes. Although underweight to Bryce Young in the captain relative to the field, 6% of him in my lineups compared to 10%. So about half the field, Bryce Young in terms of captain exposure, getting to him way more in the flex. And then if we look at some of the other players that we're getting to as far as skill position players from the Bears, Roschon Johnson, getting to him in about 1/3 of lineups, also getting to Cole Kmet in about 1/3 of lineups. Chuba Hubbard, getting to him a much more than where's Sanders. Yeah, or Miles Sanders. So only 5% of Miles Sanders in my top lineups compared to 26% of Chuba Hubbard. We saw Hubbard start at running back for the Panthers over Sanders last week, and I'm going to assume that ends up happening again this week. It looks like it's a running back rotation, but Hubbard has been my preferred option as of late. Players I'm underweight to the field too on DK. Hardly getting to any of Deontay Foreman. He's expected to be somewhat popular, 24.4%, only got to in 4% of lineup. So Sims much more favoring Roschon Johnson as opposed to Foreman. And then also coming in underweight to field on Eddie Pinheiro as the Panthers kicker. Underweight to DJ Moore, underweight to Miles Sanders, and then also underweight to Cairo Santos as the Bears kicker. So not very much kicker exposure, but I'm getting to the defenses as a different way to save salary with the kickers and DSTs, which we fairly frequently will see pop up predominantly on some of these showdown slates. And then also something else here is that Chuba Hubbard, even though he is my preferred running back for the Panthers, still underweight to him both the captain and the flex spot by a little bit here. So underweight to the running games as a whole in this spot and getting to the passing games a little bit more. The quarterbacks and then Mingo, Thielen, Cole Kmet as some of the pass catching options. Let's go and check out FanDuel now. We'll build lineups for FanDuel and see what looks different. Typically, I end up getting more exposure to defenses on FanDuel than I do on DraftKings, but I got a whole bunch of defense exposure on DK. So who knows what that's going to mean for some of the exposures here. Like, am I going to end up getting to like 50% of the Panthers defense or something like that? We'll find out shortly. So what I'm doing right here is just building out 10,000 lineups in the contest generator, and then we'll put them into the Sims tool and they'll play against each other 40,000 times, and that'll help us identify what our best lineups are for FanDuel and then which players make the most sense to get exposure to. Let's see, what is the payout structure for FanDuel today? FanDuel has a $500,000 prize pool, 20% to first. All right, so run the sim here. And now also, if we go ahead and look at some of the pricing on FanDuel, Bagent, very expensive. He is $16,000 compared to $14,500 for Bryce Young. Adam Thielen priced in between them at $15,000. The pricing on the defenses, the Bears are $9,500, the Panthers $8,500. So I do expect them to be our two most rostered value options here. All right, favorite the top 150. And still leaving salary on the table for FanDuel, not as much as we were on DK. Actually, the top projected lineup I have here does use all of the salary. And then the other lineups here, this is leaving $1,500 on the table. And then same for this, $1,500, $500, $2,500. Some salary being left on the table, but not quite as extreme. Lineups here, the number one overall projected lineup that I have for FanDuel, it is Adam Thielen, Roschon Johnson, Jonathan Mingo, Bryce Young, and Tyson Bagent. So this is a stack of pass catchers. And Roschon Johnson, even though he is a running back, he's very capable of catching passes out of the backfield. Lineups that are expected to be duped the most over on FanDuel, we have, actually, this one did pop up my top 150, and it is Adam Thielen, Bryce Young, Panthers defense, Cairo Santos, Chuba Hubbard. And just kind of goes to show how unique it could be on this slate, because even though it's only set to 20% payout to first place, not that many of the heavily duped lineups made it into my top 150, even though a lot of them are projecting fairly well. Exposures. Let's see what we have here. And yeah, it wasn't too far off. Panthers defense and Bears defense both popping up a ton. Much more of the Panthers D than the Bears. Panthers in 41.3% of lineups here. Bears in 25.3%. Two most rostered players are Bryce Young and Tyson Bagent, getting to a ton of Bagent in the MVP spot on FanDuel. More than half of my lineups have an MVP Bagent, 52%. And then in the flex spot, I have him 27%. So overall, about 80% of lines, 4 out of 5, Tyson Bagent on my top 150 lineups. Bryce Young, I have 58% in the flex spot and 16% in the captain spot. So also 3/4 of lineups with Bryce Young over on FanDuel. So lots of quarterbacks, lots of the defense. And then as far as the other players here, 36% of Mingo, another contrarian option who looks pretty good on FanDuel, just as he did on DK. Roschon Johnson only projected for 13% ownership on FanDuel, got to him in 34.7% of lineups. So these are pretty contrarian lineups. Bagent only 15% on the MVP spot. Roschon Johnson, Jonathan Mingo, both ownership in the teens. When you're getting that kind of ownership on a one-game slate, those lineups are going to look different. Other players we're getting to, Adam Thielen as a pay-up option, although not getting to Thielen as much as we got to Bryce Young or Tyson Bagent. So we are underweight to the field on Thielen. And just because of the way that the PPR bonus works, half point on FanDuel compared to a full point on DraftKings, Adam Thielen does look a lot better on DK than he does on FanDuel. And then if we look at some of the other players here that we are underweight to the field to, Not really underweight to Bajan because we got so much MVP exposure to him, but underweight to him in the flex spot. And then we are underweight to Khalil Herbert, underweight to Deontay Foreman, underweight to Eddie Pinheiro. Bears defense actually somewhat popular in the MVP spots. We're getting more of them in the flex spot, hardly any in the MVP spot, and also underweight on to Adam Thielen and Cole Kmet. So I'll pull back up the exposures here. And nothing else too crazy stands out about even with the field on DJ Moore on FanDuel as we were underweight to him on DraftKings. And yeah, that is pretty much going to wrap it up here. If you guys have any questions at all about the slate for today, check out Live Before Lock. We're going to have Neil Orfield and Lofty. They're going to be breaking down the slate tonight, 7:15 p.m., leading up to lock at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. And also, if you haven't done it yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for our NFL package, which includes everything you guys saw on screen here, link below to sign up. Thank you guys very much for watching. Good luck tonight.